Hello all, and welcome from Cincinnati, Ohio, where I've just completed my participation in a multi-day conference, having given two talks. I do apologize for the delay in posting the forum and this video. I simply was overbooked, and again apologize for that delay. I will do my best that will not happen for the balance of the semester. Fortunately, there is a little cushion in the next 2 weeks, and hopefully nobody will go off track. If there is a consequence in terms of needing more time, fair is fair, and please be in touch with me privately, KIRabbiLJS@AOL.com, and I'll be glad to accommodate your own needs as I'm asking you to accommodate mine. We have an important and serious topic to contemplate now for the next 10 days or so before we reconvene, and that is the rise of anti-Semitism, modern anti-Semitism, across the board, from the Ural Mountains, across Europe, across the Atlantic, and into the United States, particularly during the last quarter of the 19th century. For those of you in Holocaust studies, for those of you who took this class in trying to understand the run-up to the Holocaust, this is a particularly important phase in modern Jewish history and a critical phase in the history of anti-Semitism around the world, including the United States. There are the traditional sources of anti-Semitism, including ethnic difference, religious differences, and religious doctrine. In the 19th century in particular, we find the rise of Romanticism with its adulation of the folk, the nation, the ethnos, seeing different groups as being unique, often incompatible with one another. It's the diametrical opposite, of course, of reason and rationalism as expressed in the Enlightenment period, and that provides some foundation. There is a massive political reaction in Europe, first to Napoleon, and then again against other attempts to liberalize political life from Tsarist Russia all the way to the United States. There is also the development of a pseudoscience of race that begins mostly in France with the work of Gobineau. Gobineau himself was not anti-Semitic, although other French theorists, later Trumont and others, are decidedly anti-Semitic. And it forms a basis for a pseudo-scientific view of racialized human history, and ultimately a prioritization of the races and the labeling of the Jewish people as being particularly nefarious. Moving east from west, in Russia, as problems arise and the hold of the Tsarist regime over the people begins to break down, the state seizes on anti-Semitism as a way of unifying people and having them forget their other troubles. In particular, the Tsarist police are able to transform a document originally written in France, kind of an anti-Enlightenment document, and transform it into the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, which lays out an international conspiracy theory led by Jews and Jewish bankers, perhaps based on the model of the Rothschild family, which becomes a critically important document in the spread of anti-Semitism. It's all fabricated. However, it still has play today, and it continues to be distributed by the Iranians, Saudi government, various right-wing groups. It is very important in that it lays out an international Jewish conspiracy. Furthermore, the Ministry of the Interior in Russia under Podnestov develops a actively anti-Semitic policy following the assassination of the Tsar, including violence, which is not only endured but often instigated by the state against the Jewish community. They gain in violent capacity from 1881 on, and then particularly after the Russian Revolution, which is beyond the scope of this talk, during the period of the Civil War in Russia, attain an unheard of volatility with casualties running into the hundreds of thousands, the greatest persecutions in numbers against the Jews since the pogroms of Bogdan Khmelnytsky in the 17th century. So Russia, which at this point also includes Poland, Lithuania, other countries, sees a very steep rise in anti-Semitism. It will lead to the development of the Zionist movement in Russia, particularly as many democratic and liberal groups among Russian Jews become disappointed in developments and turn toward other solutions. Yet other Russian Jews will turn to socialism for utopian answers. Moving west, there's also a dramatic increase in anti-Semitism in German-speaking lands. Here, the French theory will play a particular role. Anti-Semitism as a reaction against Jewish emancipation is most important. In places such as Vienna, a mayor by the name of Karl Lueger, also known for a pistol, runs on an explicitly anti-Semitic platform. In Germany, you have the figure of Wilhelm Marr, M-A-R-R, also constructing specifically anti-Semitic political platforms. Many people credit Marr with the invention of the term anti-Semitism, although it is likely that about 10 years earlier, a Jewish Wissenschaft scholar in Germany by the name of Moritz Steinschneider was the actual creator of the term. It had a specifically racial reference to it, although it did come to include all forms of animus against Jews and Judaism. France saw not only the rise of a theoretical literature against the Jews, but in the 1890s a very dramatic public display of anti-Semitism when a Jewish officer, Alfred Dreyfus, was accused of betraying France, providing information to the Prussian enemy, causing France a humiliating defeat and terrible punishment at the hands of the Germans. It was all a fabrication, and eventually Dreyfus was acquitted. In the meanwhile, France polarized over this trial. The military, the church, and certain government elements, conservative political groups, reactionary groups, all joined on the bandwagon against Dreyfus. Over against them were other political groups led by one Émile Zola, important writer of the period, who understood the whole trial to be a great travesty. As many of you know, the trial was covered by a young reporter by the name of Theodor Herzl. One moment, siren, excuse that. Theodor Herzl, writing a Budapest Jew, writing for a Viennese newspaper, covering it. He himself was most assimilated. Came to the conclusion that if France could not digest its Jews, then no country could. And he then fathers what becomes known as political Zionism. We will talk about the different types of Zionism in the future. There are many different branches to the Zionist movement. Herzl is broadly credited with creating the World Zionist movement, especially once it convenes in Switzerland. England during this period, which, as you recall, had a bitter experience with anti-Semitism during the Middle Ages and expelled its Jews until 1654, grew quite alarmed with the increase of Jewish immigration from Russia, and in 1905 imposed strict quotas on the number of Jews who could settle in England. Curiously, the person in Parliament who advocated closing England to Jews was Lord Balfour, later responsible for the British government's endorsement of the Balfour Declaration, proclaiming that British Palestine could serve as a homeland for the Jews. Personally, it's led me to wonder as to whether or not he was just as interested in keeping the Jews from going to England, later foiled by the White Paper, as he was in helping the Jewish people in their various pursuits. In the United States, you see a massive immigration of Jews from Russia between 1881, when the Jewish population is about 250,000, to World War I, when the Jewish population has exceeded 2 million. 2 million Jews essentially come from Tsarist Russia to the United States. Many elements in American society were obviously alarmed by this huge increase in the number of Jews, which they felt threatened the Anglo-Saxon character of the United States. Ultimately, immigration quotas were passed here, as they were in England and other places, although in this country it did not occur until 1921, when the first of the Johnson Acts were enacted, the goal of which was to preserve the Anglo-Saxon character of America and to keep Jews as well as a few other groups out because their influence was viewed as pernicious. Throughout the final quarter of the 19th century, Jews, including uptown Jews, found themselves increasingly discriminated in the United States. Clubs were closed to them. Areas of residence were closed against them, restrictive covenants, and alike. Ultimately, quotas began to appear in colleges across the land, and there was even a tragic lynching of a Jewish businessman by the name of Leo Frank, which took place in Georgia in 1913 and led directly to the founding of the Anti-Defamation League, which is the most visible of several major Jewish watchdog organizations protecting American Jews as well as other communities, Jewish communities around the world, from anti-Semitism. Over against this darkening picture during the last quarter of the 19th century and the run-up to World War I in the 20th century, you also have the idea of progress, how ironic, during the same period. This, of course, is fueled by scientific achievement, new technological inventions, the widespread commercial use of electricity, the rise of the telephone, the automobile, mechanical public transportation, the development of new techniques and medicine, in the healing arts, there was a widespread feeling that the world was increasingly perfectible, and that mankind ultimately would be able to realize its full greatness. One of the shadows, of course, is the rising anti-Semitism during this period, which cast a great shadow over the Jewish experience. Jews, for their part, tended to cling to various concepts of progress and ideologies that would correct the situation, in some cases mostly for the Jewish people, but in other cases more broadly, leading to a Jewish embrace of various utopian, socialist, as well as communist ideologies, the idea being that in order to solve the Jewish problems, you needed to solve everybody's problems. And then finally, one last example. How bad did it get? In France, during the Dreyfus Affair, the country polarized, as I previously said. And every part of French society took positions on Dreyfus. And it was really quite remarkable, to the point where leading artists such as Degas, Cézanne, Renoir, and others began to express openly anti-Semitic feelings. For his part, Renoir even instructed those who handled him commercially not to post his work at exhibitions with the likes of Pissarro, Soutine, and others who were of Jewish origin, as he did not want to be associated with them. So let's say the 50 years or so running up to World War I sees both an intensification of the hope in modernity, as well as an intensification of anti-Semitism in many different forms. Of course, nobody could foresee the mutation that some of this work, particularly the writings of the English anti-Semite Houston Stuart Chamberlain, would have, particularly in Germany, and how it would lead to or help develop the eliminationist genocidal policies of the Nazis and the SS in Germany. So this week we're going to read and discuss together, as you do so well, the rise of modern anti-Semitism, try to fathom its depths, and why it was so powerful, and what could have happened to counter its spread. Obviously that didn't happen. It's a counterfactual question, but one still has to wonder, why didn't ideas of progress and inclusion cap this anti-Semitism? The failure, of course, results in the development of the most deadly philosophy ever experienced by the human race. So let's read and talk with one another, and I'll be back online in April. For those who celebrate Passover, there's a Jewish expression, Zissen Pesach, which means have a very sweet Passover. Thank you.